together to do some education on parking, blue zones?
I am indeed. That's the reason why I called. But before I do, I just want to very quickly say that, you know, in following the media this week, we had a fire chief out in Whitburn who came forward with, I guess, a number of horrific stories in his view on the moose situation. We've had a person on a motorcycle who unfortunately succumbed to injuries as a result of a moose accident. And I think we had an RCMP officer who was actually involved in a moose vehicle collision. So, obviously, this is a serious problem, and more has to be done. And I'll call maybe next week just to talk about that a little more, to give some of my views. But yes, Pete, I did attend the media conference that was held at the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities Newfoundland Labrador's office on Torbay Road this morning. First of all, I want to say that, obviously it's a good thing. I'm pleased to see that there's going to be some funding for more awareness, I guess, of both the issues around, persons parking in blue zones who ought not to be, but more particularly awareness and information sessions and brochures and so on that are going to go out, I guess, to businesses to make them aware of what the blue zone regulations are, and obviously to ensure that they are in compliance with the blue zone legislation. So that is a positive thing, and I want to thank Minister Brazel. I actually met with Minister Brazel about 5 or 6 weeks ago. We had a really good discussion around the blue zone legislation and the fact that this legislation was passed in the House of Assembly some 2.5 years ago, with little to nothing done in terms of enforcement and so on. And he committed to me at that time that he was going to take the matter seriously and do something with it. And I'm glad to see that today that at least this is a first step, and I'm encouraged by that. But I will certainly be, as a critic for Service NL, and as someone who has, really taken on this cause on behalf of some people in my district who have concerns over it, and I've presented numerous petitions in the House of Assembly and spoke on it numerous times, and so I have a keen interest in it, and it does fall under my critic role, and I will be monitoring this to make sure that, that we have action, because it's great to do a news conference and talk about all the things you're going to do. And I'm glad that they're consulting with COD and L, that they're involved, because they should have been involved when the legislation was written, and again, it should have happened 2.5 years ago. But it is happening now, and I'll be monitoring it and to ensure that, we're seeing some solid action. The other side of it, though, Pete, is that this really addresses, like, the educational piece, but it doesn't address the enforcement piece.
No.
And currently,
COD NL can't do that. They need to go somewhere else. But let me say, before we go any further, I've learned 3 things today. Number one is I had no idea there were anywhere near 19,000 permits in the province for these parking spaces.
And growing.
I didn't know that the province was back working with COD NL, because the last big story, of course, is where they lost their funding.
Yep.
And now I know that PC Minister David Brazel is still talking to Liberal Paul Lane.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the bottom line is, Pete, partisan politics aside, we were all elected to represent people, and we all have roles. He has a role as minister, I have a role as critic, and I'm prepared to work with Dave Brazel or any other minister or caucus member in there.
Well, I'm sure you are. I just wasn't sure he was...
I'm glad to see he is as well.
Yeah, I wasn't sure he was still willing to work or even discuss things with everybody, including yourself. But anyway, so, okay, the other thing, like you say, the enforcement has to go another step, clearly.
Yes.
That has not been up to scratch. I do know people, including myself, who have been dinged with the big ticket, and let me tell you, it works.
Yeah, well,
I'll be getting another one of them.
Absolutely. And when we talk about enforcement now, there's various aspects of it. Like, first of all, in terms of when the legislation came into place, what should have happened, in my view, is that when the fines were raised from $100 to $400, that should have been done, should have been mandatory and done through the legislation, so that it would just be mandatory across the board, all across the island. What they've done is that they've put in a range of 100 to 400, and then every single individual municipality would have to go in and adjust its regulations and choose the fines. So really, it's only $100, but St. John's was the first to come to take the initiative to raise it to 400. Mount Pearl has since followed suit very recently, and certainly I'm hoping that other municipalities are going to do the same. And of course, there's the enforcement by the RNC and others to make sure people who park in blue zones, who ought not to be, that it's enforced and they're fined accordingly. But the other issue in terms of enforcement is the fact that we have this legislation. It's been in place for 2.5 years. At the time when it was passed, all new builds and new businesses and establishments, it was effective immediately that they would have to be in compliance with the new legislation. And then all existing businesses were given 3 months to get in compliance. Now, in fairness to the businesses, they were never really notified. I mean, the government put out a news release and put something up on their website, and which business person is going to be trolling government websites all day long to see what's the latest?
Well, the government didn't even do it themselves everywhere.
No, and they still have. And that's another piece, is that there are still numerous government buildings and agencies and healthcare facilities and schools and so on, which are currently still not in compliance with their own legislation. Now, in fairness, since we put some pressure on, I think in the House of Assembly with petitions and so on, I have seen some areas, like out here at the Confederation Building, they've done a really good job, and Newfoundland Labrador Housing, which is unbelievable that they would not be in compliance, but they weren't. Now they are, and so we are seeing movement in some government facilities. Obviously, we've lit a fire, and that's a good thing, but there's still much work to be done, and I will certainly be monitoring that as well, and we're going to be holding government's feet to the fire to make sure that if you're going to pass legislation that is going to be adhered to, and particularly when it comes to our own government facilities, this day and age, not to be up to spec is just totally unacceptable.
Well, you can't be finding private companies for non-compliance when you're not doing it yourself. That's
true. That's true. So, Pete, just let me conclude by just saying, because I don't want to come across as being negative on this. This is a positive thing, and I want to make that very clear, that this announcement today and Service NL working in conjunction with the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities, like I said, should have been done from day one, should have been done before they even enacted the legislation. They should have been consulted, but they're doing it now. That's good. The education piece is good. So good. Glad to see COD-NL involved, and I know they'll do a great job. But, at the end of the day, there's still a lot of work to be done. And as the critic for that department, as I said, I will be monitoring it very closely. And if I see that progress is not being made, particularly when it comes to the enforcement piece, then I will continue to raise it, continue to put on pressure in the House of Assembly and so on until we get this done.
All right, sir. Listen, thanks very much again, and we'll talk on that. And by all means, call again, and we can talk about the MOOCs, because that's certainly picked up some traction again. A lot of people frustrated and fed up with the situation as it exists.
Absolutely. There's way too many people getting hurt and killed and so on, and more has to be done. We'll talk about that next week.
All right, sir. Thank
you, Pete. It's always a pleasure. Have a good afternoon.
All the best.
Okay, bye.